Before I started seminary, I spent a year working for my mentor out in Montana. And one of the tasks I ended up doing was something that I hadn't anticipated and thankfully kind of fell into my lap, which was starting a 20s and 30s program. Throughout that year, I realized how much good this program was doing for our young adults in the parish. So I went out of my way to try to find somebody to take the program over after I left. And after quite a while, I prayed, I begged God that we'd find somebody. And then one of the folks I had initially approached finally came back to me and said, yes, she'd be happy to take it over. Wanting the transition to go smoothly, I decided to take a step back. I told her, why don't you go ahead and take over now, and I'll stick around in case you have any questions or just to be background support. Now, pretty early on, our new leader had an idea for a gathering, and I don't remember exactly what it was. I just remember that I was skeptical. And I wondered if I should say something. And I thought about it a little more, but no, I really need to take a step back here. Because whether this goes well or not doesn't really matter. She's the leader of this program now, and I need to make sure she has that authority, she has that leadership to be able to do what she wants to. It was really a good thing that I did that, because the program that she came up with was a huge success. We had more people than we had in a long time, probably since we started the 20s and 30s program there. And I knew in that moment that she was going to do a great job going forward. Now, transition is the theme of our passage from Deuteronomy today. We see the Israelites, after 40 years in the wilderness, finally getting ready to go into the land that God had promised them. We see Joshua taking over the reins of leadership. We see Moses in this moment getting ready to die. This is all in the background of Moses looking out and seeing all the land spread before him that God has promised the Israelites for them to live in. Moses is only getting to see it. He won't be able to go into the land with the rest of the Israelites. But what we're missing in our lectionary, our path through the lectionary, is why that's the case for Moses. I mean, yeah, he's getting up there in years, as we hear in our reading, but that hasn't stopped him before. So why is it now that Moses isn't able to enter the land of Israel with them? To really understand that, we have to go back to our reading all the way at the beginning of this month. There we saw the Israelites once again complaining, as they always do. And in this particular moment, they're complaining about their lack of water. So God has Moses take his staff, hit the water, hit the rock, and the water from that rock comes forth for the Israelites to drink. Now, one of the readings that we've missed along the way that isn't in our lectionary leading up to today is another instance with the Israelites once again complaining. And once again, there's a rock that's got water in it. But this time things are a little bit different. And part of the reason of this is something that those who were reading C.S. Lewis's Prince Caspian with us last year may remember. There's a passage in that book where Aslan, the stand-in for God, tells Lucy that he never does the same thing twice. And that's exactly what God is doing now with the Israelites and with Moses. Because God's trying to get them to understand that it doesn't matter what method they're using, it doesn't matter what ritual they have. God's changing things up so that they know, so that they remember that it's God and God alone who they need to rely on. So God tells Moses to do something completely different this time. Not to tap his staff on the rock, but to yell at the rock to give forth its water. And that's not what Moses does. Moses instead does the exact same thing he did before. He hits the rock with his staff. And yes, the water comes forth. But in this moment, Moses has shown that he too has issues obeying God. He is no better than the rest of the Israelites around them. Now, because of their complaining, the Israelites have been told that they will wander the wilderness for 40 years before going into the land that God has promised them. That 40 years is enough time for all those who still remember their time in slavery in the land of Egypt, all those who are complaining because of that memory. This is time for them to all die off so that the Israelites can start anew and fresh in a land God has promised them. Because Moses has shown that he's no better, he too will not enter the land of Israel. However, because of all of his time of service to God, because of God's love and compassion for Moses, he is the only one who is allowed to see the land before they enter into it. Now, when it comes to leadership in the church, we must at times be willing to give up our own power, our own way of doing things, so that the next group of leaders are able to come in and do the work that God has given them to do, the work God has given them to do for us. If we can do that, as I can attest from my own experience, we will see greater things than we could even imagine. If not, we'll face the same fate that the Israelites did, as God waited for their time to be done before God went in and enacted God's plan for the future. As our psalm tells us this morning, the Lord is our refuge from one generation to another. But that's only if we let God be our refuge. Now, it's tempting to look back. We see this at the end of our reading from Deuteronomy today. There we see Moses praised as the greatest prophet that's ever been. And it's not that this praise isn't deserved. Because Moses was the one that God used to bring the Israelites out of their slavery in Egypt. Moses is the one that God used to bring to the Israelites the law. Moses is the one that helped get their community, their society started. He's the one who helped everything begin. We are right to honor him for that. Yet, at the same time, Joshua is the one who got the Israelites into the land that God had promised them. And in just 2 weeks from now, we'll see Joshua leading this group, a group that is no longer complaining, that responds to Joshua with these words: "The Lord our God we will serve, and him we will obey." It's Joshua, too, who will give his name. His name, he will be a namesake for one who will follow many years, many centuries after him. The son of a technic, a skilled worker. And this young man, this young Joshua, will build on the foundation of what we've seen with the law. Build on that foundation of the two great commandments that we get in Torah. Those two great commandments that we heard at the very beginning of our service, that we hear too at the beginning of our gospel today. This young man, Joshua, it turns out, is an heir to the great King David. This Joshua is known throughout the world over by the Greek version of his name. This young man's name is Jesus. Now we should respect what has come before. Those people, those things that have led us through that metaphorical 40 years in the wilderness in our lives. At the same time, we should also respect those who come after, who lead us from that time in the wilderness into that future that God has promised us. My hope is that we can come to be those people who don't grumble against God, but instead reflect what we see with the Thessalonians today. Those who Paul says of his and others' leadership among them. They were gentle among them, like a nurse tenderly caring for her children. That's how much Paul loves the Thessalonians. So don't get left behind due to stubbornness or the inability to change, as we see with the Israelites of old. Instead, be open to what it is that God is working in you, so that you might see the future that God has planned for us all.